So today I am with Ajanta Chakraborty. She is co-founder and CEO of Bollywood and Culture Groove. And we met really quite a lot of years ago when you were living in Silicon Valley. And welcome, Ajanta.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to see you again.
Yes, and we have only seen each other a few times, perhaps remotely, since that time.
That's true.
I wanted first to talk to you about the shift you made, in fact, at that time when you decided to move to Chicago, and also in terms of your work, because when I knew you, you were full time in tech, although running an extremely, in my view, rich and valuable Bollywood fusion company, but which was your passion.
Yes.
But you did make a move from that 9 to 5 to really leaning into your art, from what I can tell.
Yes, absolutely. It was quite a process. So I moved to Chicago because my husband got into business school here. And so we initially tried the whole long distance thing. It didn't work. And so I finally decided I was going to wrap up my life in California and start afresh in the Midwest. And so I came over here and I still had my tech job. So I'd actually gotten a
That's right.
transfer with my work. And so I was still working as a consultant, which has pretty crazy hours. And it was great. In some sense, you decent pay, good job security, everything was awesome. Except that I really started to work in the dance space a lot more once I came here. And I also saw that there was a real gap. There wasn't really another company that was providing these Bollywood dances and those experiences at scale. Whereas in Bay Area, there was like one every block of the road. Here, there was nobody. And so it really felt like there was not only a gap, but also there was a need that I could truly fulfill. And so that's why, it was, I think 2010 is when I moved here. And by 2011, I realized there was so much I could do, so many people I could introduce, to Indian dances and the joy of it. And that's when I took the decision to essentially, say goodbye to my very nice and stable tech career and instead wanting to become a full-time artist.
So when I knew you here, I know that your husband Vivek, who was very involved in the company, the dance company, was always very supportive of that. And I'm wondering what that was like when you decided to go over full time, and how that felt in the family context.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first moved here, I was supporting him through the expenses because he was going to school full time. And so the moment he graduated, I said, my turn. and, and he said, go for it. He was being so supportive throughout this whole time. Because as you know, I mean, it's hard enough being an entrepreneur. Being an arts entrepreneur is even more tricky. Just because of how constrained you are in terms of your resources and funding and all of that. But throughout this all, he's been standing like a rock for me, and that I'm very grateful for that.
It's so wonderful to hear. Interestingly, in these first stories of interviews that I'm recording, I am seeing what's emerging, and I'm sure it has to do with the people that I've naturally chosen. But what's emerging is a picture of the arts as being possible and lucrative, that you can do what you love, you can use your artistic talent in a business context. And that's a message that I feel needs to be heard and celebrated.
That is so true. And I feel like I've seen in a lot of the artists that I've met, there is a sort of shame that they associate with being
Absolutely.
business minded, as if only they can be one of two people, that you can coexist both as somebody who is very dedicated to their art and is continuously working towards it, but also wants to run a successful business. And they think that these two identities that they couldn't possibly adopt both. And I think I wish they would know that it's okay to be both and it's okay to think about it as a business. So you're absolutely right. But it definitely is possible.
And I
Tried
think
and tested.
maybe I wonder what you think about this. If part of what goes on is that there's an undervaluing of art at times, depending on the culture, but really we're talking about the United States. So there's a longing for art, a use of art, and exposure to art all the time, whether on television or in public spaces or with murals or whatever it is. But there isn't an understanding of how much that enriches our lives and how much we actually benefit from it. We're benefiting and enjoying it and feeling good about environments that are filled with art, or simply binge watching something that is art, right? During the pandemic.
I
And
was
so
going
I
to say.
think it's around value in society. And I'm wondering how that may have played out for you, if at all, with people in your family, or how you worked through any of those feelings around the right to earn money with your work.
This is, yes, I love it. And yeah, I have to say, I mean, just imagine it during the pandemic. Nobody was sharing corporate videos. We were all sharing music and dance and all of that. That's all you saw on social. This is what we finally realized. In order to really have meaning and be connected, we need art in our lives. It's amazing to see. But yes, back to my own transition. So it's really interesting, especially because I'm from an Indian family. I come from a society where there are only two ways of living. You are either a doctor or an engineer. Now, it has changed a lot over the times, but I am still coming from a time when it hadn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really interesting. And, I would meet my relatives and they would jokingly say, or no, actually pretty seriously say, oh, it's a nice hobby. I'm sure that helps you pass your time. These kind of jabs and comments that they would make, essentially kind of reducing what I do in one single sentence. I think I'm lucky in the sense that my immediate family didn't see it like that, because I think that would have been pretty disheartening. And so, most of my parents, my siblings, I got all the moral support that I needed from there. So I'm very great, very lucky in that sense. Once in a while they would say that, imagine if you still had a tech career at this point. Just imagine how far you have gone, in terms of the success and the monetary value and so on. But they also understood what I was doing. They understood that this was, now something that was adding so much meaning to my life, not just artistically but also financially. So yeah, it was really interesting, but I think I faced it more from the neighbors and the extended family member, as opposed to my immediate family member. My extended family member, my neighbors and stuff in India, they wouldn't even understand. I wouldn't even care to really explain. I would just leave it as I have a dance company, and that's it.
I can really relate to that, in terms of, I think you personally know where in my family I was supported and where I wasn't. And with my parents, there was tremendous support. So that's something that I know I talked to you a lot about at the time, because there was definitely some barriers at home for me, even participating in your dance group.
Yes, exactly. And it makes a huge difference, right?
It
That
does.
just one, yeah, that
It
one thing
does.
can really make it or break it for you. Yeah.
And so also, I've learned through that journey with myself that I can surround myself with people who support my voice in my work. And it's certainly really helped for me that I had parents who did that. And I'm really happy that you had parents and a husband who has done that. It makes a really big difference. People do it without that, and it's amazing. But how much more helpful when you already have your inner voices, sometimes with the shame around what you're doing, and then society and the bigger picture. If you have those supportive voices, and I think anyone who's listening to this, thinking about how you can be a supportive voice to those in your life who may be making these shifts, is perhaps a helpful thing that I want to provoke you to think about in this interview. Can you tell us about Culture Groove Kids and this whole venture, which I've been witnessing simply on social media and also in having read a few of the books? And that's been, I think, a very exciting project, it looks like, from here.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started in Chicago, I started as a very traditional Bollywood dance company. We were just going to focus on, my strength has always been fitness. And so that's what I started with. And so it was Bollywood Groove cardio. I created that format. I started teaching that. It was incredibly popular. And then within a year, I started to get sort of requests from folks saying, hey, I can come in and do the workout. What about my child? Do you have something for them too? And it wasn't something that naturally came to me, but I decided to give it a shot. Why not? New opportunities. And so that's when we started putting together the children's program. But the moment I started creating the kids program, I realized I didn't want to just teach them dance. I wanted to give them a bigger context of where this was coming from, because most of all these kids, they're born and raised in the US. And for them, this is sort of, my mom sent me to do this, so I'm going to do this kind of a mindset that they would come in with. And then they would have so much fun. And I would like, let me tell you the story of the people from whom this dance comes from. And the moment you do that, it's like you kind of see through their eyes how the dots get connected. And you're now giving them a much bigger context through which they're seeing this work. And so that to me was so fulfilling. So what I started doing is, I didn't have books at that time. So I would create these sad little PowerPoints myself and I would print them out and then I would hold them in class and say, look, this is who you're dancing about. And you could just see their eyes light up. And, everybody liked it. The kids loved it. The parents loved it. The educators loved it. And so that's kind of where this whole idea of combining dances and stories kind of came about. And then from there, it was a few years down the line where, Vivek and I were discussing this and we were like, why should somebody have to come to my classes physically in order to consume the cultural content that I'm sharing? And so that's where the idea of the book came about. What can we create that can be consumed all over the world? And hence the first book was born. And then, now we're 13 books down. We've sold 65,000 copies of our books worldwide, which sometimes it just feels like a dream, because we call ourselves accidental authors. I never knew I would be writing a book. I mean,
So wonderful.
It was all about dance,
yes.
Right? When we first met. And then before I knew, now we have readers around the world. And the concept of dances and stories, I've taken it further. I now do that through our workshops, virtually, in person, nationally, everywhere. So it's kind of gone through many different, sort of morphing itself around as time goes by. But the books were such an important chapter, and have been continuing to, is just because, and I know I'm kind of talking a lot about it, but it's just been so exciting. My goal was, how can I make it super exciting for a 3-year-old wanting to sit through a book? We know they're not exactly known for their attention span, right? It's like the attention span of an ant. And then how do you make it exciting? That was my biggest challenge. And so that's been kind of the eye with which we've written the books.
I can imagine that having a child yourself during this time must have had an impact on this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when our first book came out, Ruhan was only 2 years old, right? But within a year, we could start testing our content on him. And he took that job very seriously, by the way. He considers himself like a serious editor. And he'd be like, there is an extra dot here, or you need to change this and that. It was amazing to see. So yeah, it's actually been wonderful having him sort of grow in this environment and just kind of, absorbing it all in. It's been terrific.
Please tell us the title of your book series, or what are the names that people need to remember? And there will be links to everything Ajanta's talking about in the podcast notes.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. Yeah, it's called Maya and Neel's India Adventure Series. And the easiest way to find it is on Amazon. So if you just go to Amazon and you type that out, or you can go to my website, bollygroove.com/books. That'll also take you to the Amazon catalog.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And now I'm going to ask you the questions that I ask everyone. And I tend to like to end on a positive note. So we will actually start with, if you can share something about one of your more disempowered moments with Voce.
Yes. I mean, there are a couple that came to my mind, something that was very sort of related to one event. As you know, I present in front of rather large crowds sometimes. And there have been moments where I've had so many events back to back that by the time I'm in the last event of the week, I've lost my voice. And I can't really do much without voice when I'm standing on a stage because they're not just watching me, they're listening to me. And I really use my voice as a source of energy to them. Like that's how I teach. And so losing your voice on stage is not fun. And I remember I had this massive workshop that I was going to do. There were going to be a few hundred people. It was very high profile. And I had no voice left. And I was mortified because I literally did not know how to execute this, except that I had to really question myself and say, you don't have to be perfect. It's okay. Maybe this would be less than what you think it should be. But guess what? In the eyes of the person who's there, who's an attendee or a guest, it might just be fine. And so I ended up taking, someone who sort of was at least somewhat familiar with my work, and I had to use their voice. I had to like signal to them what I wanted them to say, and they spoke on the mic while I used my body. And it was so well received. It's one of the things that I really struggle with as a performer is that I just think everything should be perfect. And it was a great lesson that day that, sometimes it's okay if it's not.
I think
But
I think that's the biggest takeaway from that experience. So as a voice coach, of course, I could say, well, you can learn to breathe to support your voice. Well, we know that. But the most important thing here is the aspect of perfection, because that's so often what is required to get us through those moments is a certain self-love and self-talk around maybe it's good enough. And I also think this is such a healthy version of borrowing functioning, which is a phrase that I learned over the last few years that is often associated with using others in a way that perhaps we shouldn't. But in this case, borrowing functioning so transparently in a way that supported you, where you couldn't hide that you'd lost your voice, but you could use your physical voice while you were supported by someone else. So actually, in so many ways, love that story.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I love how you described it. It's pretty perfect. But the other one that I wanted to quickly also share, it's not so much about the physical voice itself, but it's about the accent. It's about the emphasis. And as an immigrant, you feel that. And it was so interesting, so in India, not everybody speaks the same way. In fact, there are so many different dialects and languages and accents and so on. We're so used to it. And so when somebody, speaks in a way that we don't immediately understand, we try to guess it, we try to figure it out, but with an eye of essentially, understanding that diversity is normal. And that there is going to be variety in which how people will speak. And so I was used to that. And then you come to the US and there's only one way of speaking. And I truly mean it, not in terms of just my accent. So even if I'll give you an example. If in here, you would say the word biology and the emphasis is different. Whereas in India, you might say biology. And if I said the word it probably comes from the British English influence as well. But if I said that here, I would get blank stares, as in they're not able to figure out what I'm actually saying. Not just that, but you feel less in that moment. There is a sense of, are you ignorant? Are you coming in from less knowledge? Is how you feel in that moment. And I remember having, feeling that over and over again through my interactions when I first came to this country. Little word usages. I went to a store and I was looking for, I think it was a stuffed toy that I was looking for. And in India, this is soft toy. And so I used the word soft toy, and you should just see the look on the person saying, oh my gosh, who am I dealing with here? Like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
And that's an English phrase. Soft
there
toys.
You go, right?
That's an English
exactly.
phrase. Yep.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
So again, it's those differences, but it's how it's perceived. Whereas in India, it was so normal. Whereas over here, you felt like you were less. And that was hard. And if I had to think about something where I felt disempowered, It's like, no, I'm a bright person. Like, you can't just
Mhm.
judge me based on the how I just spoke. And of course, over time, you start speaking how they speak over here. But I just remember those experiences, and it wasn't fun.
It's really interesting that you touch on that for sort of two reasons. I've just started doing reels, and I have a reel that's currently, I did 2 weeks ago. It continues to be popular from people that are not following me. And it's entirely about accent. I don't know if you saw it, but it's just about everyone has an accent. No matter who you are on the other side of this screen or these headphones, everyone has an accent. And in fact,
Mm-hmm.
Americans have accents, and they have some different accents than each other, but it's only in the US that I personally have heard the phrase "you have an accent," as opposed to the understanding such as in the UK, where there's so many accents in such a small tiny island. There are just so many accents per square foot that it's not quite phrased like that, which is not to say it's perfect in any way over there, but simply that the attitude to accent is different. And that no
Yes.
matter what, if you say to someone, you have an accent, there is a feeling of other. And one of the hardest things is saying a word and not having people understand you. I think that's very relatable, probably to a lot of my listeners. And I've worked with Indians who wanted to change their accent. And what I've often supported them to do is to clarify their accent, because accent's so much a part of identity. Now, for some people, they feel really adamant about changing, and I would support them with what their real goals are. But generally, to maintain identity, but to have clearer speech in a particular culture we're in. And for me, the biggest aha as a speech coach in that context was, oh, it's syllabic emphasis. So it's
Yes.
exactly that. The syllabic emphasis is quite different from ours. And yet that's Indian English, and that is valid as Indian English. There's many different forms of English.
Yeah.
But to be better understood, if you simply change the syllabic emphasis as you've learned to do, it helps. It's one of the big things. When I go in and say, could I have some water, please? People always say sorry, because of that particular, they're not expecting another sound out of my mouth. And then I have to say, can I have some water, please?
There you go.
Just,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. But also different accents are perceived differently.
Oh,
Like,
yes.
it depends which one it is. There is a sort of sense of, which one is okay, and coming from almost like,
Absolutely.
oh, we find English accents so charming.
Right.
Whereas we might, the same person will say Hispanic accents are so hard to understand. It's even though they're facing the same kind of difficulty, it's how they perceive which
Right.
one as being associated with what. So
It's
yeah, it's
also
really
what you're
interesting.
used to. And being a white European, generally, it's a very different thing showing up with an accent than being Indian or Latino or any person of color. So that absolutely, it's very important to state that. So I'd love to hear about a very empowered experience with voice.
So, like I mentioned, as I do use my voice pretty, like it's such a part of my work identity. There is this persona that goes out and interacts with people, and whether it's a small group of like 5 people, or I'm talking 2,000 people up on a stage, my voice is such a unique thing that has become part of my work, much more than some of the other people. It's how I speak, how I cheer, how I bring, like I use that as a mechanism for bringing joy and all of that, and it's been great. And I always assumed that my physical presence, of course, makes a difference. It's a combination of the two. But I think that the most empowered I felt was right when the pandemic hit, because suddenly I was teaching a whole week worth of workshops entirely on screen. I was no longer physically present. And yet my voice was able to get me the same outcome. I could have, again, little kids, who were probably even looking at, some of them were on a phone, not even a big screen, just listening to my voice, listening to the stories I was telling them, listening to them, just leading them through the dances that I was doing. and yet they were hooked onto that screen. And it felt so amazing because like I said, it wasn't even that I was physically present with them, and yet my voice could have that same outcome. And I knew that it wasn't just that, oh, it's the pandemic, so people have no choices, they just have to get on the screen. But it was like seeing the same kid come back over and over for weeks and weeks and weeks. And there were kids who stayed with me the whole duration of the pandemic, as long as I did those classes. And it was so amazing. And like I said, so much of my work is now telling stories, and being able to have them, still gain that experience through my voice. It was amazing to watch.
I think that's fabulous, particularly because people were on screens a lot. And I think that's a big testament to your obvious enthusiasm, whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening on the podcast. Ajanta is a tremendously enthusiastic person, which is one of the things I've always loved about her. It's just really fun to be around. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that you had them really engaged.
Yes, absolutely. But I wasn't expecting that, through just the voice as a medium. So that was a really fun moment to see.
Yes, absolutely. Um, I wanted also to ask you, whose voice do you love and why?
So this is going to be a cheesy answer, but I have to share this with you. When I was little, my brother was a sailor, and so he would, or a marine engineer, I should say. And he would go on these big trips, and then he would come back with a whole bunch of audio cassettes. Clearly, in when I was a child, that was a technology, and he would record them off of the ship's radio. And I remember there was this, one of the cassettes he brought, and I was just listening to it. I think it was all the Grammy Award winners of that year or something like that. And Out Comes Time After Time by Cindi Lauper. And I remember as a kid just being fascinated with her voice. And I had heard other songs by her, Girls Just Want to Have Fun and all of that. And it's a different voice than what she uses in Time After Time. There was something so raw in the way she sang that song. I would just stand like a statue and just listen to the song every time it would come on. It just spoke to me in a way that no other song did at that time. And it was truly her voice that I was constantly being gravitated to. And I don't know really what it was. Like I said, the only way I could describe it, it was so soulful, it was so raw. And I just loved like listening to her. I think I wore out that cassette. Like eventually the ribbon broke off because I had played it so many times. So when I really think about like a voice that I really love, I have to say it has to be her in that particular song, Time After Time.
It's so wonderful. I can hear it in my head. She has there's almost a sense of cello or a sense of, to that particular song and how she sings it, there is such a sense of the emotion in it in a
Right.
very easeful way, as if it's just kind of dropping out of her, such that when I've heard covers of it, I've been like, why? You know?
Right.
Not that there aren't good
Exactly.
covers, but when you grew up hearing Cyndi Lauper and that was your only version, you can't really improve on it. It's a bit like Beatles covers. It's a little difficult to really get interested. In my view, that's just,
Yes.
you know.
I agree with you. Yes.
Well, Ajanta, it's been a real pleasure. Is there anything else you'd like to share that you want people to know or me to know?
No, I just personally, on a note, I just wanted to say how amazing it is to see you also just transform and bloom into so many different ways since the
Uh,
days I've known you. And I think you're doing some incredible work, and I'm just so proud of you.
Thank you, Ajanta. It's really lovely. I feel similarly seeing all of what you're doing. And I think that when there's real resonance with people, it's not surprising that there might be similarities in terms of how they're growing and moving in the world. And
That is absolutely true.
I find increasingly that being around that particular resonance, whatever it is with people, is where I really want to spend my time.
Yep, absolutely. I know. As I'm getting older, I'm feeling the same way. I want to
Hmm.
be surrounded by people who are similar and could lift me up. And I don't want to spend any more time like trying to impress people who don't.
That's very tiring. It's very tiring. And I found that as a coach too, the people who resonate will gravitate. So you are paid in a way, or rather rewarded for just being authentic. Because then those who are listening to this podcast and enjoying it are people who resonate with what's being said. I don't have to try and please by being inauthentic, because ultimately, and it's okay if someone isn't of the same resonance, they'll have their own resonances with other people.
Exactly. Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
we can still respect different ways of being, but what are the energies we want to be around? And it often has a lot to do with how we want to feel, I think.
That is so true. Absolutely. Well put, as always.
Thank you so much, Ajanta. And please do see below for the podcast notes so that you can learn more about what Ajanta does in the world and check out some of this wonderful material.